Racist officer stops black woman, then learns she's the head of internal affairs. A routine traffic stop transforms into a ticking time bomb when an officer's prejudice meets its match in a confident woman. Little does he know, the wheels of justice are about to spin in a direction he never saw coming. Welcome to our channel. Endeavor to like, share, and subscribe as we promise to bring you stories that inspire, challenge, and leave you wanting more. Also, let us know where you are watching from, and we'll be in the comments to engage. Here's Brenda's story. Brenda Alex gripped the steering wheel with one hand, the other resting on the briefcase beside her. The city streets were unusually quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The day had been long but rewarding, capped by a presentation she had spent weeks preparing. As the head of internal affairs, Brenda was no stranger to pressure, yet tonight felt lighter. She welcomed the peace as she made her way home. Her brief reprieve was short-lived. The flash of red and blue lights illuminated her rearview mirror, snapping her out of her thoughts. Brenda's heart skipped a beat, but her face remained composed. Pulling over to the side of the road, she exhaled slowly and rolled down her window slightly, the crisp evening air rushing her face. The officer approached, his movements deliberate and heavy. His posture was stiff, his face unreadable except for the glint of suspicion in his eyes. Brenda straightened her back, her professional demeanor a shield against the unknown. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his tone sharp and devoid of courtesy. Brenda glanced at his name tag, Barry. She met his gaze with a calm expression. "Of course, officer," she said, her voice even. She reached for her purse with deliberate care, mindful not to make any sudden moves. Pulling out her license and registration, she handed them to him. Barry scanned the documents quickly, his eyes darting between the paperwork and her face. "What are you doing in this area?" he asked, his tone laced with accusation. Brenda resisted the urge to sigh. She had encountered this tone before, one that presumed guilt without cause. "I'm heading home," she replied evenly, her voice firm but polite. She maintained eye contact, her calmness unshaken despite the tension in the air. Barry's eyes narrowed. He took a step back, scrutinizing her with a lingering sneer. "You've got a broken taillight," he said flatly. Brenda blinked, her mind immediately recalling the recent inspection her car had passed without issue. She knew her vehicle was in perfect condition. Still, she kept her expression neutral. "I wasn't aware of that," she said, her tone measured. "Thank you for letting me know." Barry tilted his head slightly, clearly dissatisfied with her response. He stared at her for a moment longer, as though waiting for her to slip up. When she didn't, he stepped back toward his patrol car. Brenda remained in her seat, her fingers lightly tapping the steering wheel. Her instincts, honed from years in law enforcement, told her this wasn't just a routine stop. The tension in the air was palpable, the officer's demeanor brimming with something unspoken but unmistakable. She glanced at her phone resting on the passenger seat, her thoughts momentarily drifting to the countless cases she had reviewed, each one a testament to the need for accountability, fairness, and respect. This stop felt like one of those moments, a situation teetering on the edge of escalation, depending on the choices made in the next few minutes. Brenda took another deep breath and waited, her calm exterior masking the storm of thoughts swirling inside. Whatever came next, she was ready. Barry returned to Brenda's car, his jaw clenched and his posture rigid. His expression had hardened, and his eyes carried a glint of something more than suspicion. Disdain, perhaps. The air between them felt heavier now, charged with unspoken tension. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice cold and commanding. Brenda's brow furrowed slightly. "Is that necessary, officer? I've provided you with everything you requested," she replied calmly, her voice measured but firm. Barry's face darkened. "Step out of the car," he barked, his tone rising, his hand hovering ominously near his holstered weapon. Brenda exhaled slowly, her composure unshaken. She had encountered men like Barry before, Men who wielded authority as a shield for their insecurities, their biases simmering just beneath the surface. The situation was precarious, but she knew escalating it wouldn't help. She reached for the door handle, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. As she stepped out of the car, the cool night air brushed against her face, a stark contrast to the heated exchange unfolding. Brenda stood tall, her stance confident yet non-confrontational, her sharp gaze meeting Barry's with quiet strength. Barry's eyes flicked to the interior of her car. His gaze lingered on the sleek briefcase in the passenger seat and the tailored suit jacket draped neatly over it. His suspicion deepened, his mind clearly racing to piece together a narrative that justified his growing unease. "What's in the car?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "Work materials," Brenda replied evenly, her voice steady as she folded her hands in front of her. "I'm a public servant," Barry scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer. "A public servant, huh? Let me guess. You work at the DMV or something." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line, her patience tested but intact. She refused to rise to the bait. "Actually," she said, her tone cool and precise, "I work in law enforcement." Barry's chuckle was short and humorless, his disbelief evident. "Sure you do," he muttered, shaking his head as if dismissing her words outright. The tension thickened, the air between them almost suffocating. Barry's dismissive attitude clashed with Brenda's composed confidence, the disparity between their behaviors becoming increasingly stark. Despite his attempts to provoke her, she stood firm, unyielding yet calm. "You might want to check your assumptions, officer," Brenda said quietly, her voice carrying an edge of authority. "Respect is crucial in situations like this." For a moment, Barry's smirk faltered, his confidence wavering under the weight of her words, but he quickly masked it, stepping closer as if to reassert his dominance. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped, his tone defensive. "You think you're above the law." Brenda raised an eyebrow, her expression remaining composed. "No, officer," she said, her voice steady. "I think we all have to answer to the law." Her words hung in the air, carrying a weight that Barry couldn't ignore. The balance of power in the conversation had shifted, though subtly, as Brenda's quiet strength and unwavering dignity began to chip away at his veneer of authority. The confrontation wasn't over, but Brenda knew one thing for certain. Respect wasn't just crucial, it was non-negotiable. Barry stood near his patrol car, Brenda's documents in hand, his fingers rifling through them with an air of authority that now seemed forced. He glanced over her license again, his suspicion unwavering, as though willing something incriminating to appear on the pristine paperwork. Brenda watched him calmly from where she stood, her posture straight and steady, her hands resting at her sides. The crackle of his radio interrupted the tense silence. Barry paused, his eyes darting to the device clipped to his shoulder. He pressed the button, his voice casual. "Routine stop," he said curtly, as though dismissing the inquiry entirely. The response came almost immediately, the dispatcher's voice sharper this time. "Confirm the name on the license. Over." Barry frowned, his brows knitting in confusion. "Name is Brenda Alex," he replied, glancing at the documents in his hand. The next message from the dispatcher hit like a thunderclap. "Be advised. The individual you've stopped is Brenda Alex, head of internal affairs. Confirm status immediately." Barry froze. The words seemed to echo in his ears, louder than the faint hum of the evening air. For a moment, the world around him seemed to tilt, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him. His confidence evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The realization hit like a freight train. Brenda Alex wasn't just another citizen. She was the person who held power over officers like him, the one responsible for investigating misconduct and holding law enforcement accountable. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the radio. Copy that," he stammered, his voice cracking despite his best efforts to sound composed. He turned slowly, his gaze meeting Brenda's. She hadn't moved from her spot, her expression calm but unyielding. Her eyes bore into him, a quiet strength radiating from her that only deepened his discomfort. Her air of quiet authority now felt unmistakable, her presence commanding in a way he hadn't noticed or refused to acknowledge before. "Ma'am, I didn't know," Barry began, his voice faltering. Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line as she stepped forward slightly, her movements deliberate. "You didn't need to know," she said firmly, her tone cutting through his stammered excuses. "What you needed to do was treat me with respect, regardless of who I am." Barry's mouth opened as though to respond, but no words came out. The bravado he carried throughout the stop had vanished entirely, leaving only uncertainty and regret. He glanced down at the documents in his hand, the weight of them suddenly feeling heavier than before. Brenda's gaze didn't waver. "You see, Officer Barry," she continued, her voice steady but sharp, "the badge doesn't give you permission to demean or mistreat people. It gives you a responsibility to serve and protect. And tonight, you've failed at that." Barry's breath quickened. The implications of his actions flooded his mind. He knew his career, perhaps his entire future, could hang in the balance of what happened next. I didn't mean," he started again, but Brenda raised a hand, silencing him with a quiet gesture that spoke volumes. "Save it," she said, her tone final. "I'll be filing a report. You'll have your chance to explain yourself, under review." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the faint static of the radio on Barry's shoulder. Brenda's calm presence loomed larger than any shouted argument or angry rebuke could have. Barry stood rooted to the spot, his confidence shattered, his authority stripped away. The encounter wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a reckoning. And for Barry, it was a moment that would define the rest of his career, if he even had one left to salvage. The sterile conference room buzzed with quiet tension. Officer Barry sat stiffly in a metal chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. On either side of him were his commanding officer and a representative from Internal Affairs. His usually confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a mix of nervousness and regret. The door opened, and Brenda Alex walked in. Brenda carried a leather folder under her arm, her steps measured and deliberate. Her presence was commanding, yet she radiated an air of composure. The room seemed to shift as she took her place at the head of the table. She opened the folder, revealing neatly arranged documents, the report she had spent the early morning drafting. "Officer Barry," Brenda began, her voice calm yet firm, "last night's incident highlights serious issues, not only with your conduct, but also with the systemic culture that enables and perpetuates such behavior." Barry's shoulders slumped, his head hanging low. The words cut deep, not because they were delivered harshly, but because they carried undeniable truth. Brenda's eyes swept the room, addressing not just Barry but everyone present. "As law enforcement officers, we are entrusted with power, a power that must be wielded responsibly and with integrity. When that trust is broken, it doesn't just harm individuals. It erodes the very fabric of the communities we are sworn to serve." She slid a document across the table toward Barry. "Your actions last night didn't happen in isolation. They are symptomatic of a larger issue within our department, a culture that tolerates bias, dismisses accountability, and fails to recognize the humanity of those we encounter." Barry's lips parted as though to respond, but no words came. He knew there was no justification, no excuse that could undo what had transpired. Brenda continued, her voice unwavering. "The law doesn't work when those entrusted to enforce it act without integrity," she said. "This isn't just about you. It's about ensuring that no one else, citizen or officer, has to experience what happened last night." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy blanket. Barry's commanding officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his expression a mix of embarrassment and concern. Brenda closed her folder with a quiet snap, signaling the end of her prepared remarks. "Effective immediately, Officer Barry will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation," she announced. "This department will also be implementing mandatory training on bias, respect, and the ethical use of authority. Barry's face flushed, and his hands tightened around the edge of the table. He knew his career hung in the balance, but he also understood that this was bigger than him. His actions had sparked a reckoning, one that could no longer be ignored. The fallout was swift and widespread. News of the incident spread through the department, prompting uncomfortable conversations among officers about bias, accountability, and the misuse of authority. Brenda's actions became a rallying cry for reform, her calm and decisive handling of the situation serving as a powerful example of how to confront systemic issues without resorting to hostility or retribution. Outside the department, the public's response was overwhelmingly supportive. Citizens praised Brenda's courage and professionalism, many sharing their own experiences with law enforcement in a growing call for change. For Brenda, the encounter served as a stark reminder of the challenges and responsibilities that came with her role. She had taken on the difficult job of overseeing accountability in law enforcement because she believed in the potential for change, even when faced with deeply ingrained resistance. That morning in the conference room wasn't just a moment of reckoning for Barry. It was a turning point for the entire department, a chance to confront its flaws and begin the hard work of rebuilding trust. As Brenda left the meeting, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was determined to see it through. For her, last night's encounter had been more than a confrontation. It had been an opportunity to turn prejudice into progress, a testament to the power of dignity, respect, and courage in the face of bias. Thank you for watching and supporting our storytelling journey. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe. It's the best way to stay connected and help us bring more powerful tales to life. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and I'll be in the comment.